And welcome back to the Hex Knight podcast. This is episode 2, and I'm David.
And I'm Ivan. And we're going to have a chat about how you bring your party of characters together, how you get your campaign set up so you don't have to chase down your characters over half the game world.
Right. And I think we've all dealt with this problem. You have everyone develop their characters on their own at home. You come together for the session, and you have a broad mix of different classes and races, characters from different locations, or you don't even talk about the location they're from. And the question comes up, why are these characters here together at this location, starting off in this adventure like they're a team? And I was just wondering what your thoughts are, Ivan, on how you would resolve that as a game master and in possibly campaign development.
Luckily, this is a problem that I can speak from with experience, because it's something that I think, like you said, everyone has had to deal with at some point.
Yep.
But I think it's also something where the way that we're used to doing things becomes ingrained pretty easily. And I think, especially in games where there is no rolling to be made when you make your character, it's very tempting to just tell people, like, hey, we're playing on Saturday, make a character, blah, blah, blah. And then everyone shows up, and you got 2 cowboys, a Roman legionnaire, and Optimus Prime. And it starts looking kind of weird because the game master was preparing a Robin Hood game. So I think there's probably 4 ways I can think of that you can tackle it, all of which may fit a particular campaign or other. I think I don't know if we really hit that last time, but I think it's important to say none of these ideas and methods are necessarily perfect, and they're not necessarily perfect for your specific situation. We're, I think, really more interested in just having discussions and maybe giving some tools that could fit a specific game. What do you say?
Right.
So I think the first is to cheat, and don't tell them to make the characters on their own. When a campaign comes together, typically in my experience, one of 2 things happen. Either A, the group sits together and they discuss what they would like to play, or B, the GM sits together with himself or herself and their drink and figures out what they want to run. Because as I experienced last time, I set up a campaign. After I outlined like 4 or 5 different ideas with different pros and cons, everyone's response was just run the one you want to do. So I think if you're the GM and you're coming to the group with your pitch, you're going to come to them and say, hey, we're going to play GURPS. We're going to play in the final days of the Roman Empire, and it's actually going to be about a supernatural conspiracy. I think if you give them a focused pitch on what the game is going to be, that sets everyone. So now you can send everyone off and say, hey, make a 150-point character, but they have to be able to fit in a Roman urban setting. Which I guess is a way of saying don't make these particular characters, but I think you can make it more positive by just giving them the direction. You know, you're still going to have the player who wants to play something that is really weird, because there's always one guy who always wants to play against type, right?
Yep.
But now at least they can create that character in the context of the pitch. So maybe the guy wants to play like a druid who's escaped from like pagan England. Like, okay, well, now we can start figuring out how he fits, but at least it's a character that exists in the context of the game that we're building. Or, you know, you can make it much more open than that at the same time. If the group decides that we want to play a game of fantasy pirates, we want to sail the oceans of the world and get into fights with people and look for treasure. Like, okay, that's cool, but so now everyone can build a character. So don't show up with a character who is, you know, afraid of water.
For sure.
And put a few points into swimming if that's the thing the game has. So I think that's the first thing, is be clear up front with the kind of game you're playing. Even if you may not even have a goal, I think. Like if you're making like a sandbox game where you're just going to wander around looking for trouble, you can still kind of fence it off a little bit. Like, hey, this is going to be a game about just kind of exploring the world map and seeing what we find. It's going to be sort of random. It's going to be sort of player driven. But nobody make evil characters for this one, and nobody makes characters that aren't from the main book. Like you can still kind of a little bit. I don't think you want to have like long lists of like this, and this option is not allowed unless it really won't work. What do you think?
Yeah, I think carefully defining the setting is key, and just making sure all the characters fit into the setting. That should be a really solid guide for most people.
Yeah, I think you probably have a leg up if you're playing like an actual setting with a book. Or like if you sit down and you say, "Oh, let's play a campaign that's like Rangers in Game of Thrones," like then you have it like laser focused. But I think even if you're making your own game, then you just have to be much more proactive with it, right?
Well, it's setting up the expectations and having, I think, a related set of references that all the players understand. So you bring up Game of Thrones. Everyone's seen the show or read the books, so they know what that means. You bring up something from Roman times, and you have a solid understanding of what that world is like, what types of people would be involved in adventure in that world. And so even if people decide to go off track and do something weird, it's weird within that world, and as long as it can be logically linked back to the system in any type of story or a collaborative kind of storytelling situation, that's what we really need. So that's a go ahead.
Sorry. I think that also helps you get characters who are anchored in the game worlds, which I think makes for a better character and just a more interesting experience. Like get them, like it feels like you're making characters that could really exist in this place. I know that different like views on like world immersion versus the game as like a tactical challenge, and people can be all over that. But I think either way, I think that's a pretty solid option. Option number 2 is a outshoot of that, which is much more simple. Just tell them that this is where you start. I like to do that when I get the urge to run like an old school dungeon crawl. Because in that case, the world probably doesn't matter and the characters probably won't make it. So the only thing you need to know is an intro along the lines of, you're all broke and adventurous. You've heard that in the Hell Cave of Infinite Despair, there's an awful lot of gold at the bottom. You're at the entrance to the dungeon. What do you do? So if the game is that specific, don't even bother. I think, because what you don't want to have happen is you want to run the Hell Cave of Infinite Despair, where you have just added like an encounter of like 30 liches riding dragons. And then you get a player who shows up who just wrote like a 10-page backstory about the character's family and their political aspirations. You don't want them to do that.
Right.
So save that one for a different day. Save that one for the Game of Thrones one.
Right.
So I think sometimes you can, like, people get antsy about railroading, but I don't think it's railroading. I think it's just carving it out. It's like if you know that the GM has just purchased like a published adventure, like everyone sitting down with the expectation, like, okay, we're going to play through this thing.
Yep.
So when your character gets a letter from their aunt that their castle is haunted and can you please come fix it, you're not going to tell the GM that, well, my character is going to like drive back to New England, just like become a vegetable farmer. Like
right.
The guy you're playing with just spent like $12 buying this adventure, so you're going to play it. I think that's the same.
Yeah, I in that situation, I wouldn't even really be concerned about railroading people. Like, as the player, I think the more complex the campaign is, the more comfortable I would be with even having the game master develop characters and provide them to players pre-made, and maybe allowing you to like change some scores around here and there to individualize it to your play style.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. So you give them a character that's, or you can do, like, some games will support really well.
You just know that they fit in.
Right, and you can ensure if the adventure relies on having a really specific thing. Like, if you're playing a one-shot game, you don't want it to, like, bogged down because the group just doesn't have what they need. So you can build that in, and then depending on the game, like give them some extra points or skill points to like tailor it a little bit. Yeah, I think and also if the players haven't spent like 3 hours making the character, if you're playing a one-shot game, they might be a little more amenable to dying pointlessly because they drank the wrong potion or something.
Yeah.
They can save that as well. The third trick is, and some games make a formal thing of this, is make it the player's responsibility, but either ensure that it happens in character creation or have it incentivized in some way. I think it was one of the more recent versions of Traveler, but I might remember wrong, where when you create the game, each player creates a link to another player's character, and they get like a bonus skill point or some other mechanic. So you say, after you create your character, like I roll up my guy, and he's a like old gnarled Marine who mustered out because he was injured. And you make your character, and he's an army guy, but he's a bit younger, and he got decorated for something. Like, okay, well, maybe you saved my ass in a battle, and that's how we know each other. So now we have a link with the characters, and we each get to add, like, an extra skill point or something. So I think you can do a lot with that. Most players will be eager enough if there's a bonus to be had to take advantage of that, and now you don't have to... the game I'm running right now, which is a Swedish RPG, you can create a relationship to each of the other players, and you can use that at some point during the session to give them a bonus on the dice roll. Like, your characters are, I admire your character, and as a result, you actually can fix a dice roll that you failed at some point, that kind of thing. So I think you can make it a mechanical thing, or you can even just have it as part of the character creation step. Like step 7 is connect your character to somebody else in the group. Or you can, if you're sitting at a table, you can just go around. Like, you make a connection to Steve's character, Steve, Bob's character, and you just sort of go around. I think... the last point I had put down was actually the same, but without rewarding them for it. Just tell them. Like, hey, I'm not going to chase everyone down for 45 minutes while one of you wants to make a flower shop. So you are going to talk together and make characters that have a reason to be together, whatever that turns out to be. The Reason campaign, the hook we came up with was most of the characters wanted to be traveling mercenaries. And so they had experience working and adventuring together before, and then the couple of characters that weren't connected to that, the GM then figured out how they could be fit in because they had made characters that were more plot relevant, I suppose. But you can share out the responsibility, right?
Totally. That's one thing I did in the past, is set up a character that was key to the whole plot. And so everyone else kind of came together around them.
Yeah, I think that could be dangerous if they continue to be the key. I think ideally you want them to get the adventure going, but you don't want to put yourself in a situation. I had this happen in a game where there was a personal problem with a player, and unfortunately they had also been set up as a character that the whole group sort of revolved around. And that ended up, it wasn't the only thing that crashed the game, but it was definitely part of it, which is kind of a bitter reminder. Like I think it's good to have a character who can bring them in. Like if you're investigating the haunted mansion, then you have the one character who's like the nephew of the person owning the castle. Like, that's fine. Right. And everyone is friends with them. Or you set that as a condition. Like, you can make whatever character fits the setting, but they all have to be like relatives or friends of this one person.
Right.
But then once you're going, you want to make sure that, like, if this player suddenly moves to France or their character gets eaten by a bear, you don't want the whole adventure to like grind to a halt.
Yeah, that would be the sticking point, losing the character. I mean, you could always make a character into an NPC if the player goes or there's a problem with them.
Yeah, you can do that. But in that case, I suppose you could also just have it be an NPC to begin with.
Yeah.
It depends. Like, it's probably more fun that it is one of the players, but maybe sometimes that doesn't play out. Like, both are perfectly valid options, I think.
Right.
So it also depends. Like, sometimes you will have the one player who, like, will really be excited about being in that role, even if it doesn't really give them Like it's not necessarily an advantage in the game. It just lets them shine like a little bit extra.
Right.
Like I don't think indulging that is a bad thing in most cases.
Mm-hmm. But of course, when they die, things change dramatically. But I guess that could go back to our first episode and dealing with failure and changing the orientation of the game, what the goals are. I mean, even this conversation in setting up kind of the party, we're dealing with expectations and reasonable expectations being communicated by the game master and the players. As long as they're on the same page, I think there's a lot of latitude.
Yeah, and you can still be earlier before the World Plague hit. I was running King Arthur Pendragon, which is a game very specifically about playing knights in King Arthur's England. Like that's what it does. There's no care for anything else. So it's laser focused. And one of the things the book talks about is what do you do if one of your players is a woman and doesn't want to play as a dude? And it gives you a couple of different ways you can handle it. You can say, well, this is what the setting is. It's semi-historical. It follows, the literature, which didn't have any knights who are women. However, throughout history, there's always been women who disguise themselves as men. So you want to play that as a character? Go for it. That sounds like an interesting character. You can say that the world, and this is the option I picked, the world is what it would be in the all the knights are dudes. However, it's also a place where there's wizards and lions running around in England. So could there be a knight who's a woman? Yeah. Is there going to be a bunch? Probably not. But now the player gets to make the character they want. And the setting still is true to whatever you want it to be. And the third option the book tells you is like, hey, these stories have already been reinterpreted for like 1,000 years or 600 years. Go ahead and just do it again. Who cares? Like, if you want to make a knight who's a gay Jewish woman, go for it. So it's, and I think you can do a lot. Like, we were in a game that was supposed to be a low magic Dungeons and Dragons game, and that that's a sentence doesn't actually work when playing D&D.
Right.
But the answer was that we got to make, with a few exceptions, we got to make the characters we wanted, but the world didn't. So it was very rare we met anyone else who was a spellcaster. And when we did, they were usually hidden or they were part of some sort of secretive organization. So it was the same sort of thing. We didn't really get restricted on what characters we could make, but the world still felt like what the GM wanted it to be, which I think is you can't always do that, but I think if you can, it's a good way of keeping everyone, like everyone gets a little bit of what they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's an interesting idea. Creating contrast between the player group and the world they're operating in, making them stand out special in a way.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's easily defendable. Like, if you look at history, you can find all sorts of weird, exotic people who really lived, but were like, like 1 in a billion.
Right.
So, and it's one of those things where I think sometimes gamers tend to be oddly like more restricted in their design or creation than like real life tends to be, which is funny because the games we play have like elves and spaceships.
Right.
Sometimes elf spaceships. So yeah, like I understand the urge that you don't want the player to be like super weird and out there because it can also damage the setting. But I think a lot of times people can just kind of like, it's okay. Like, here's the basic pitch. Like I said, if we're playing Pendragon, the basic pitch that we're all knights and the Saxons are invading England. So what do you want to do with it? Do you want to have a knight whose family is like from an old line of pagans and they haven't converted to Christianity? Cool. That doesn't mean that every knight you meet will be a pagan in like, the year 500 in England. But could a thing? Yeah, I'm sure that was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think you can satisfy the players and still link it up with your campaign and have your campaign actually like feel cohesive. At least if everyone is being rational and reasonable about it.
Yeah, in that case, I would see the main problem being conflicts between player characters, or people playing out conflicts between players as characters.
Yeah,
Ways.
sometimes you have to, and there's always the one player who wants to like be something secret. Yeah, once where I had, being young and dumb, I had decided my cleric was going to pretend he was a paladin for like no reason. It was stupid. But there's always that, like some people just like to have a secret going on. But maybe that's a topic to tackle at a different inter-party conflict. That's a good episode.
Yeah.
Although, to be honest, I am absolutely not beyond just telling people. Everyone is going to make characters that get along, because you're going to be in a situation that will kill you if you don't. So,
or you could go back to one of my primary rules: is I'm quite okay killing your character and making you roll up another one if you're going to be a jerk.
Right. I think a lot of these, it comes down to, we can just the next 20 episodes will just be us saying talk to your group first, and then roll the credits. But we have a little more professional ambition.
Well, there are all the ways you can do that.
Yeah, we're here to tell you what to tell your players. In any event, that is all I have.
Yeah, same here. Anything new with Nordic Weasel Games?
Not since last time. I'm working feverishly on finishing the second edition update to Renegade Scout, which was all fan-funded up front. Part of the pitch was that I didn't want to create a second book. I wanted to just be an upgrade everybody got. So I basically did what everyone says not to do, and went on the internet and said, if you guys send me a bunch of money on PayPal, I'll do this update. And everyone did, so now I'm doing the update. So that's taking up pretty much all of my design time. There are other things I'm tinkering with. I mentioned Robin Hood last time. I'm still working on that. I'm working on revising some other things. I have 3 scenario packs for historical games that fans have submitted that I need to get. One is almost done laying out for fighting in Norway in World War II. That's super exciting. I have one for Kalkin Gol, the first fight between the Soviets and the Japanese at the start of World War II. So that's super exciting stuff. But I don't. Whenever I have money outstanding like that from people, I feel terrible every day that I'm not done with it. So I'm trying to get that done as soon as possible and make it as cool as possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always the quality should take precedence. A good work takes as long as it takes.
Yeah, it's like the Kickstarter thing. I've tried doing crowdfunding in the past, and maybe that's a good episode as well. But I always hate doing it because I hate the idea of having already gotten paid for stuff that isn't finished. But I guess nowadays that's just something you have to kind of suck up and get over, because everything gets Kickstarted now.
Yeah.
If you are a 5 clicks from the Zone player, there is a little expansion pack featuring 3 small battles linked together fighting an evil gang of crazy people. So swing by the Borgum Vault and look for Nordic Weasel, and it'll be available for you. If you were on Patreon, you would get it for free, of course, as long as you're throwing $5 in. That's not actually free, but you know what I mean. So that's everything I had to speak about tonight. So that is a good evening from Ivan.
Great. And yeah, again, thanks a lot again, everyone, for checking in on Hex Night, and hopefully we'll be back next week.